And a question for you, Minister Bradshaw. Seeing that Professor Robertson had predicted that Barbados could be dealing with ashfall for days, weeks, or even months. My question to you is there currently an emergency protocol in place, or do you plan to establish one if students are in class and we do get news ashfall that there will be an ashfall event or even months? My question to you is there currently
UNICEF and
emergency protocol in place, or do you plan to establish one?
We do have protocols for evacuation of the schools for natural disasters. I don't know that ashfall would have been any contemplation back then. Certainly, it would have been more earthquakes. It would have been, what to do if you get an earthquake. And CDEMA can speak to this as well. I think it would have been more in terms of water damage and stuff like that in the schools. But I think these similar principles still apply in terms of what to do. Obviously, with ashfall, you're going to have to make sure that windows are closed. And so I think the necessary protocols will be put in place in the event that children are in the classroom. But I think from this whole experience, I think it is fair to say that once they are in the school, the ventilation becomes an issue, obviously, if the children are in the classroom for any protracted period of time. And that is why we are concerned, obviously, if there is continuous ashfall and we are able to return to the school environment, what will happen in the event that children are in that environment? Equally, we can't do nothing. And so we have to prepare for every eventuality in the event that it happens and just have the necessary evacuation plans in place to be able to deal with it at this point in time. But there's nothing that we can say in terms of certainty, Barry.
But a follow-up question to that quickly, Minister. To your knowledge, are you aware of any percentage of our teacher complement being trained in evacuation processes?
There are health and safety committees at the various schools. There's been a thrust in the last few months to try to get more and more established and fully functioning. A number of training sessions would have been done by UNICEF as well. And I think we have a lot of professionals within the system who themselves are interested in disaster management and certainly in the evacuation procedures. We just concluded a session with the Caribbean Schools Initiative, where again, we were looking at the safety of buildings, looking at being able to train teachers. Barbados is not a signatory, but we certainly support and have signed on and bought into a number of the things that have been, indicated to us that we must do. The intention is to sign on at the appropriate time, but I know we've been working very closely with CDEMA as well to be able to look at training and certainly to be able to look at the plant generally and certainly to put those things in place. So training in these areas definitely going forward is something not just for the teachers, but certainly a better understanding by students as to how to respond in this type of environment. It's becoming more and more apparent that we need to do it.
Minister Bradshaw, I know the pivot before the volcano was to try to get back to in-person as quickly as possible. But where were we in terms of the devices? Is that something that is still being pursued, notwithstanding the fact that the desire is to get back to in-person classes?
Yeah, all of the devices that we had procured both on island and the ones that were due to come in, all of those are actually on island, and distribution has been continuing. Again, I probably missed out that earlier in my presentation as to how we were preparing, but the devices certainly have been being deployed. I think the nursery schools would have gotten some of their devices. Teachers would have been accessing devices. So again, this week would have been the continuation of that rollout plan. And as we would have anticipated, once children go back into a face-to-face, the demand for the devices obviously lessens because they are doing face-to-face. But we recognize that technology is going to play a large part going forward, because we don't know what to expect going forward, and we may have to use the online environment obviously a lot more. So we've been training teachers in how to make that transition, incorporating technology into pedagogy, trying to make sure that we have enough devices for the specialized subjects as well, specific devices for those with AutoCAD, and just trying to make that general transition so that we prepare all stakeholders, a bit better than perhaps they may have been prepared before. Erdison is doing a really good job now. We've integrated them more into teacher training, and we're doing some projects with the IDB as well, trying to make sure that as we get more technology into the schools, that we're also able to make sure that teachers are comfortable using the online platform.
And Minister Tanisha here, how would you describe the support from the two teachers unions for the changes that you have announced today?
It was quite heartwarming to hear the response from all of them. And I certainly commented that it was the amount of support that we got yesterday was quite unlike any other meeting that I've held. I think generally there's a sense that we have been trying to get students back in face-to-face, and with all the best intentions, this incident has now taken place, which has pretty much set us back. So even if there were reservations about going back to face-to-face, I think for the most part, after all the noise was over, everybody settled down and started to work with the Ministry of Education on the protocols and the general oversight of what was transpiring to get students and teachers back to school on the 19th. I think the understanding of the ministry and certainly all of us is that, you know, this is not an environment that's going to be easy to teach in, and it's not going to be an environment to learn in. I think we're all collectively agreed that face-to-face is better. And whether it's an issue of vaccinations or whether it's now an issue of dust and environmental issues, the sooner that we can bring a resolution to this in the interest of all parties is really in the best interest of education. So overall, I would say I was heartened by the support for the additional week, certainly to give us time to clean, with the understanding that if we have to take further steps, we'll come back and we'll consult and just engage with everyone at every opportunity. But, you know, I continue to make the point that regardless of what happens in terms of going back face-to-face, there are some big items that we need to work together on in terms of continuing professional development, teacher reform, teacher training. And so we are not stopping, even things to do with the skills, technical and vocational skills. We've got meetings coming up on those to look deeper at how we integrate that more into the psyche of education and all stakeholders. So we are not stopping in terms of our conversation with unions and their inclusion. And I don't think that they're stopping in terms of their discussions with us as well. But, you know, again, we will just continue to consult with them and include them at every opportunity that we can.
Minister, has the length of this term been affected? Is it going to be shortened or lengthened or not affected?
I don't have that crystal ball at this point, Barry. I'm going to simply reiterate to all of you and to the country, give us till the 26th. Obviously, before the 26th, we will have, over the next couple of days, rather, we will be able to know how things are taking shape. And we'll get an idea, I think, from the seismologists as to where we stand in terms of the ash and how to prepare. But to say, you know, 2 days after an assessment that we can say with full certainty how things are going to look and how we can plan, I think it would be a little difficult for most people to be able to do so. We are planning for A, planning for B, C, and D, but at the same time, you know, it is difficult to do so in an environment where there's so many variables. We will clean today and there could be an ashfall just the day before we open, and we'll have to be prepared to make that adjustment. So people just have to be a bit more flexible than I think they ever have been, and to appreciate that this government isn't sitting down and waiting to see what happens. We're cleaning because we know that's who we are. We get up and we do what we have to do, and we're encouraging people to get around their houses clean, cleaning ministries, cleaning the schools, cleaning the churches, you know, just get out there and clean. It might happen again or it might not, but we have to simply, as CDEMA and all the others would tell us, we've got to be prepared for all eventualities right now. And let me just say that after this is the hurricane season. So in our planning, we're also looking at our schools as institutions, which would also be shelters. And that for us is a major concern, making sure that all of the things that, for instance, ash can come in through a window, but we've been preparing for water damage more so than we've been preparing for dust. So now we have to look at things like breeze blocks, and should we start to phase out some of those things? Should we start to redesign schools in a different way to accommodate for both ashfall as well as rainfall? Those are all considerations on the table. And as I said, we're not stopping simply because there's ash falling outside. After this, there must be education. So we won't stop.
Minister Bradshaw, I just have one last question as it relates to teachers and the vaccinations. I know it would have been disrupted because of the ashfall, and you've also had the break in between, but how many more teachers are to be vaccinated, and how much is because of reluctance versus disruption?
Well, let me just tell you that some of the teachers already had been vaccinated before we started this exercise that we have been discovering. And obviously some of them might have been on the chronic, in the category where they have chronic illnesses. So they had access, whether through the polyclinics or other ways, to be able to have the vaccinations. The 2,500 includes the educators. Just to give you a precise number, I really can't at this point in time. Suffice to say that we have tried to include all of the ancillary staff, teachers, all of the people who will interface with students within the school environment, and to give as much protection as possible and comfort to people once they have to interface with children at schools.
Are there any further questions? Well, if there are no more questions, moments ago, I received a note from the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. CBC will launch a national appeal to assist our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent who have been badly affected by the eruption of the La Sourfrière volcano. And details of the initiative, called Help SVG, will be announced shortly, but essentially it would allow Barbadians to drive to CBC and drop off the necessary items that will be boxed and sent to St. Vincent. And CBC has made it clear they will be working with the relevant government agencies, and more details on Help SVG will come on TV8 and CBC's radio stations. At this time, let me thank Minister of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, the Honorable Santia Bradshaw, who spoke on the delayed reopening of schools and indeed the cleanup of the institutions. We also heard from the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or CDEMA, Ms. Elizabeth Riley, on relief efforts for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Thank you, members of the media, and you at home, for joining us. Good afternoon.